Last week, I said that the inspired words and traditions of God's people were the springboard from which Mary leapt into the fullness of time. She leapt into action and hastened to aid her elderly cousin Elizabeth, who was also miraculously pregnant. I don't think there's any scene in the gospel that encapsulates our theme of old and young together in the joy of Christ better than the visitation. In the scene of the Magnificat, Mary's words echo many passages of the Old Testament. She was obviously steeped in the faith of her people. Next, we see Mary's loving concern for her elderly relative. Her love is not limited to words, it's practical. Mary understands that the gift she has received from God is not a privilege but a vocation. She sets out with a sense of purpose, and she serves with the selflessness proper to love. It would be wonderful if we could just say to every young person, since you are a tabernacle of the Holy Trinity through baptism, and you receive Jesus every week in the Eucharist, we're counting on you to go to the poor and the elderly and freely share with them the love of Christ that is overflowing from your heart. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Surveys reveal that 50% of young adults who were brought up Catholic now consider themselves the nuns. This means that they no longer identify with Catholicism or any other religion. It means they've distanced themselves from the love of God experienced through the sacraments. So perhaps it's time for a reverse visitation of sorts. What do I mean by that? Well, as I get older, I identify more with Elizabeth. A painting I found online helped me to see the visitation from her point of view. In the image, Elizabeth is standing on her porch with her arms outstretched and a smile on her face, ready to welcome Mary, who's standing at the bottom looking up. As people of faith who love Jesus, it's time for us to go out of our way to welcome the younger generation into our homes, our hearts, and our church community with openness and love. In Christus Vivit, Pope Francis writes, the community has an important role in the accompaniment of young people. It should feel collectively responsible for accepting, motivating, encouraging, and challenging them. All should regard young people with understanding, appreciation, and affection, and avoid constantly judging them or demanding of them a perfection beyond their years. In the visitation, we usually assume that Mary went to help Elizabeth, but I can also imagine all that Elizabeth offered Mary through accompaniment, mentoring, a safe place to collect her thoughts and gather up her courage, and maybe even a few lessons in cooking and housekeeping. If you're an older person, this week try to invite a younger family member or neighbor in for a meal or a cup of coffee and a bit of conversation, or at least make a date to do so. Then listen with an open heart. If you're young, don't be afraid to admit to an older relative or friend that you don't have it all together. Don't be afraid to ask advice about relationships or your career, or even about how to pick out a Christmas tree or make the best gravy. Drawing together young and old, you will experience the joy of Christ's presence, because he promised that wherever 2 or 3 gather in his name, he is there.